All right, well, she moves on to the section called Knowledge of Natural Law, the Significance of the Heart, and the Necessity of Discernment. She goes on to say that the natural law theory of ethics helps make sense of an otherwise surprising treatment of the moral principles that we see in Scripture, especially but not exclusively in the New Testament. The expectation that humans are capable of knowing much of how they ought to live apart from the explicit divine instructions in the form of special revelation. Again,
Right.
if she were to take that route, that would put her into the camp of the next person that we're going to read about. But she's wanting to kind of present her case that either Jesus or one of the prophets come along and say, you know to do this, and you're doing what goes against your very nature, what you know to be good, that you don't even need anyone to tell you. But obviously you're going about it the wrong way, and here I am to tell you what you already know.
Yeah. So, so what she's getting at here is that we can know the morally right thing to do, right? We're capable of knowing that. And the New Testament assumes that we're capable of knowing that. In fact, he's going to go on to say that everybody's capable of knowing the morally right thing to do.
Yeah. Thus, Gentiles who lack the revelation of Scripture are said to have the law written on their hearts, so they can be held accountable when they violate what they are capable of seeing is right. And of course, Romans 2 is the place to go for exactly that.
Right. So notice, law written on their hearts. And so how we are created, God is created in such a way that we know the moral law, even without special revelation as Gentiles, right? Because it's part of who we are. It's written on our hearts, right, as it were. And so she wants to make this point. And perhaps even more interesting, she tells us that natural law theory helps explain why even those who have access to the law and Scripture are expected to understand how to apply that law to a host of situations that Scripture does not explicitly address, right? So she's trying to make the point here that, how we apply the law, even if it's not addressed in Scripture, we're expected to know that because of how we are made, right? She says thus, for instance, in the Old Testament, the Lord wants not just compliance with, but love for and understanding of the law. And so hence the command to, talk about it as you go and as you sit down and as you stand up and as you, with your children and that sort of. And so a love and understanding that presupposes that there is something to be understood, a rationale. And of course, that rationale, she tells us, is built into our nature.
Right. That's why God goes on to say that, he commands the sacrifice of bulls and goats, and then he can come back and say, the sacrifice of bulls and goats I do not desire. Why? It's because, first of all, that's a symbol that was commanded to be done to point, obviously, to Christ as the ultimate fulfillment, but that it should be done like when the commandments are given, not so much with just do these things and then, why is produced, but do these things in love for your relationship to God and your relationship to other people, which is the summary of the law. But it's also where no one is up in arms about what Jesus claims when he says that, you say that you hate your brother. Well, you violated the commandments of murdering him in your heart. No one's up in arms about it because they understood that what he's saying is that these aren't just check boxes to do, but that they're a relationship aspect to both us and God and us and with one another. Who is our neighbor? Everybody. And who do we do it for? Or who do we sin against when we sin? Well, yes, it's in the immediate context, we're sinning against the person or ourselves, but ultimately all sin is directed at God. And so that's seen both in Old Testament and then Jesus has to come by and remind us of those things even more explicitly.
Right. And so what she's suggesting here is that we all have the knowledge of the natural law. It's written in our heart, and we see that. That's the assumption and claim of the New Testament. And not only is it written in our heart so that we can know it, even Gentiles can know it, but also we can discern how to apply it in areas that's not specifically talked about in Scripture. And we're expected to do that. And so we have this tremendous knowledge of the natural law, she's trying to argue, that is part of who we are.
So how does natural law then guide us to how to be moral? How does it affect our moral guidance? Well, for many of life's choices, natural law ethics offers what might be called non-deterministic guidance. What this means is that applied natural law may allow for a wide range of actions to qualify as good. What natural law ethics is more likely to emphasize is the importance of recognizing the factors potentially at stake in your choices and how you can responsibly inhabit whatever path you choose.
Right. So the idea here is, we have a broad area that we can choose that are, good areas to go down. And so there isn't a specific thing that we have to do. There are various choices that we can make. And then what she says there is that the natural law ethics then just helps us to determine, based on our choices, what path we should or how we should live out in the particular path that we choose. So there's lots of freedom, she tells us, right? She says the freedom that natural law ethics offers can make some people uncomfortable, in fact. Right? And so she asks the question, does such freedom make our choices arbitrary, for instance? That we can just choose anything, right? And she says the idea, as she sees it, is that because several paths are often all deemed to be good, right? So path A, B, C, you can choose between those paths. The natural law ethics allows you to choose between those paths. So several paths are good. It follows that it doesn't matter which path one chooses, and one might as well then flip a coin. So that's the problem that she's pointing out, right? This freedom, is it just arbitrary? Can we do anything and say, we can make it good, right? Well, she says natural law theorists like Mark Murphy, she mentions here, addresses this worry that choices are arbitrary under the natural law by pointing out that the reason that natural law allows multiple paths is that natural law can recognize the distinct goods available on each path. So we can go down multiple paths and they're all, it's fine. Natural law doesn't specify which path we should go down, but it allows us to see the distinct goods available regardless of the path that we choose.
Right. So if we come upon a widow in our church, do we bring them into our household, or do we give them money to exist on their own?
Right.
The improper response is to put them on an ice float and sail them off into the Pacific Ocean where they will die. That's the wrong path. But out of those two, I wish God would tell me which one to do. And so she's saying that there's freedom in both those choices. So, maybe by taking the widow in, you are not going to be able to provide for her as well as possible, but maybe giving direct money is able to have more direct care. Maybe there will be less contention that way or what have you. So, there are correct paths to take and not just one. So you do have the freedom then to make good choices, and what you choose may not always be what the person next to you chooses, but it's not arbitrary.